Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 7286. The Struggle for Talent. By the time Jovi Armelon completed his overview on the disposition of god pilots and star designers in the Red Ocean, VS felt as if he had lost a part of his innocence. Just like nearly any human, he still had the habit of engaging in a form of hero worship towards these true gods. Each of them were exemplars who climbed their way up from mediocrity and attained greatness in their own unique ways. To learn that they were selfish and power-hungry took the shine off them. VS already knew on an intellectual basis that true gods were still prone to the same faults as mortals. He just did not think that they were this bad. Still, a part of VS also grew reassured about what he learned. God pilots and star designers still retained enough of their humanity to remain recognizable. That made them easier to predict and plan around. The first flame is one of the most enigmatic subjects of all. Jovi eventually addressed the final name on the list. He has yet to emerge from the center of one of Bridgehead 1's stars, and we may not welcome him when he does. The cybernetic empress is confident that the first flame will not pose a threat to red humanity, but her confidence may be misplaced. Many people remained perplexed why the first flame chose to hibernate in such a bizarre place. VS and a small group of people may know more, but the thing about prophecies was that they were never 100% accurate. The fact that the first flame chose to take a gamble knowing that the potential outcome might not be in his favor seemed reckless. He had chosen to disappear during a time where his strength was sorely needed. The absence of a single god pilot significantly hindered red humanity's ability to defend the front lines. VS already knew that the RA stationed at least one god pilot in Yernstal on a permanent basis. There may be other locations that merited this treatment as well, which meant that the aliens at the front lines did not get pruned fast enough. This was becoming an especially more significant problem at the Terran front. Just because the mutated Vorabugs chose to attack the Rebarthans first did not mean the native aliens ceased to be a threat. Fortunately, the Terrans established an agreement with the Cybernetic Empire where the latter lent its aid in exchange for serious concessions. The Cybers had already begun to expand and take control over the star systems surrounding Bridgehead 1. These were painful concessions because many of these star systems happened to be old and extremely well developed. They were originally set up to take advantage of Bridgehead 1's prosperity, and also served as the earliest headquarters of many rising colonial powers. Taking possession of these star systems significantly increased the Cybernetic Empire's living space while further cementing its superiority in the industrial, logistical, and research sectors. The Terrans and the Rebarthans would all regret the deals they made with the Cybers down the line, but they weren't in a position to care about that at the moment. With the native aliens and the mutated Vorabugs relentlessly hammering human-occupied space, the Terrans and the Rebarthans needed all of the help that they could get. Buying time was more important than clinging onto every piece of territory. While the aid of the Cybernetic Empire would take a long time to get in position, other forces were doing their best to pick up the slack. VS occasionally received word from the Premier Fleet about successful actions. The combination of the First Sword Mark III and the Minerva Mark II remained invincible in the face of any alien force that did not field Saint armor-equipped phase leaders. The Saint commander took full advantage of the relatively fast and modern ships of the Premier Fleet to bounce around between different hotspots. In this way, the Parkinson clan's Premier Fleet essentially acted as a bootleg version of a patrolling god mech. While the First Sword Mark III and the Minerva Mark II, backed up by several hundred first-class multipurpose mechs, were not able to defeat every combination of native aliens' warfleets, they were more than powerful enough to tip the balance in most battles. That was all the defenders needed in order to win their battles. One of the consequences of a fracturing Red Association is that the competition for talent has become more intense. Jovi said, "Our leaders are not just looking at the god pilots and star designers who are already successful. They are known quantities as far as we are concerned. We are much more excited and hopeful about tomorrow's heroes. Think about the growing number of peak ace pilot who need one fantastic opportunity to transcend to godhood. Think about the master mech designers that are one grand design away from conquering an aspect of reality." That sounded serious. Jovi was completely right that people should not fixate on the absolute top. Humans were adaptable and had proven multiple times that they were capable of rising to the occasion. The ongoing crises that had befallen red humanity exerted a lot of pressure on these mature talents. Their breakthroughs could come any day now. Just because none of them had yet to transform into a true god did not mean that they were defective. Perhaps the time was not right. How probable is it that a breakthrough happens in the following year? VS asked. Jovi grinned without much mirth. Too numerous people have wasted their time and resources on this endeavor. Personally, I have seen a figure as high as 24.6%, but the confidence level of this prediction is so low that I cannot take it seriously. The true percentage may be lower than that, but I may be wrong. In other words, the Meshers had no clue. Not really. VS did not know what to make of it. Nothing happened in the first few years of the Age of Dawn, but then again the more immediate benefits of the New Age took time to proliferate. Once the concrete benefits of hypertechnology and superdimensional technology became more accessible, a lot of people who were already on the cusp of greatness might break through in batches. Perhaps that may be the reason why the quoted percentage was so high. It already took this dynamic into account. The only major point of uncertainty was whether it would take a single year or several years for the benefits to become accessible to the bulk of the current god candidates. Are there any individuals in particular that you guys find promising? VS inquired. I can easily present 100 names that we are hopeful about, and I am not involved in keeping track of every high potential figure. His friend responded. Red humanity may be a splinter of original humanity, but we are never short of brilliant heroes and eminent scholars. From the messenger of silence of the Terran Alliance to the gamer of our very own Red Association, we are hopeful that at least a handful of them will become the next celebrated god pilots. As far as mech designers are concerned, I am personally optimistic of Master Vero Goldstein. He has never neglected his mech design work even as he undertakes more leadership responsibilities. VS liked Master Goldstein a lot. His support mechs possessed a level of quality, creativity and functionality that certainly deserved to be elevated. However, it was not that simple for master mech designers to break through. From what he currently knew, masters not only needed to develop a genuine grand work, but also deepen their understanding of their own craft to the point where they could become the embodiment of a fundamental concept or law. VS vaguely understood how a master was able to do the former, but he had very little clue on how to do the latter. He figured that this was a secret that he would find out sooner or later. The Meshers would definitely fill him in once he advanced to the rank of master mech designer. It was currently a bit premature for him to think 2 steps ahead. I think I understand the situation, VS said. There are only 8 god pilots and 14 star designers in the Red Ocean. These numbers are small for the time being, but will definitely grow larger in the following decade. Since the Red Association is fracturing, it becomes incredibly important for an independent power to snatch as many of these future gods and heroes as possible. I bet that a popularity contest of sorts has already broken out. The Marmedians, the RA loyalists, and the transhumanists all seek to earn the loyalties of god candidates in the hopes of getting them while they are still affordable. It would be a lot easier to secure the services of a mighty god pilot or an incredibly clever star designer if they were already part of an organization before a breakthrough. True gods were not immune to gratitude and loyalty. Inertia alone would ensure that most of them would stick around after they had broken through. It would be too shameless of them to defect right after they attained their godhoods with the help of their existing organizations. So which groups are the most popular? That is hard to say, VS. The Red Association is a known quantity and already has a foundation of relative neutrality and stability. However, I am not blind to the fact that more radical and adventurous Tier 1 galactic citizens find that to be stifling. It is impossible to remove this fault. This trait is a symptom of the RA's identity as a trade organization. The RA was stuck. To change its DNA and its method of operation was unthinkable so long as multiple god pilots and star designers still held sway. The association could not afford to degenerate into the playground of any singular being. What about the Marmedians? They may be trying to set up their own dynasty, but they are an uncommonly united power. We frankly do not know, Jovi plainly admitted. We do not think that star designers are eager to join the Marmedian dynasty. Maybe the only possible scenario where this might happen is if one of its direct descendants manage to break through. Other star designers will likely not be interested in joining the Marmedians because they do not want to be treated as second fiddle to those who hold the right names and bloodlines. I bet the considerations are different for god pilots. Yes, so long as they are fine with helping the Marmedians realize their ambitions of empire building, we can see a possibility that one or multiple god pilots will be glad to serve them. The Energy Warder, the Limitless Provider, and the Dimensional Architect are all strong in their own right. Their expertise has become much more relevant than before. It is the dream of numerous high-ranking mech pilots to take possession of a mech designed by these 3 particular star designers. In other words, god pilots with not much political ambition but a strong hunger for powerful god mechs would definitely be willing to fight on behalf of the Marmedian dynasty. VS was surprised that the Fist of Defiance did not side with the Marmedians, but maybe his principles and loyalty to the association kept him in his current place. If this is true, then the Marmedian dynasty has the potential to grow quickly. VS remarked. It may even exceed the cybernetic empire due to accruing a growing number of true gods. The polymath hasn't made herself popular ever since she attempted to pull off a coup. Her subsequent reign over her little empire shows that she has never let go of the belief that only she is qualified to make the important decisions. I find it difficult for any external god pilot and star designer to willingly submit to her regime. More chapters in Buyers Club for TMT. Chapter 7287. Neural Interface Policy Shift. All of this talk about ambitions and empire building discomfited VS. Learning about the personal ambitions of the high and mighty Tier 1 galactic citizens caused him to no longer look up to them as much as before. That mental shift jarred VS quite a lot. So much so that Jovi pulled back and began to divert to less weighty secrets. VS allowed Jovi to brief him on matters such as secret doomsday bases, multiple successful attempts at launching generation ships to the other dwarf galaxies of Messier 87, bioengineering alien bodies that were secretly controlled by human intelligences, assassinating the leaders of relatively small but disproportionately disruptive organizations, the ongoing development of multiple new masterwork installations capable of shaping the battlefield in unprecedented new ways, and more. While these secrets sounded interesting enough when presented in isolation, they all seemed to blur in the background as far as the current recipient was concerned. It was too much. VS still couldn't get over what he learned about the schemes and ambitions of the Marmedians and the Xenotechnician. He also found it difficult to foresee what would happen to him if the evolution which finally decided to cut the cord and break away from the Red Association. How should he navigate this future? The future became more and more clouded with uncertainty. An avalanche of changes threatened to engulf Red humanity and had the potential to create huge gaps. Wasn't the Red Association supposed to be a stabilizing force? It was about to do the complete opposite. There was nothing he could do about it. Despite becoming a Tier 2 galactic citizen, he still did not possess enough power or influence to block the ambitions of a powerful god pilot or star designer. They were driven individuals who were willing to go through certain extremes in order to achieve their lifelong goals. The more Jovi talked, the more VS calmed down. Enough time had passed for his heated emotions to cool down to the point where he was able to regain his composure. He started to pay more attention to Jovi's continued disclosures. Furthermore, the Red Association is about to loosen the safety limitations on neural interface designs. Traditionally, we have always kept them tight in order to offer solid protection to mech pilots. Current events make it difficult to maintain our stance. Breakthroughs matter more than safety. By permitting mech designers to make use of more potent but dangerous neural interfaces, we hope that their works can induce more breakthroughs. That was a big change. It might not produce results immediately, but once more and more mech models got released that came with the altered neural interfaces, then the shift would gradually become more obvious. Neural interfaces with less restrictions than before promised superior performance by establishing deeper and more intimate man-machine connections. This made it easier for the mech pilot to control all of the functions of a mech, but it also increased the negative consequences of damage feedback. If a mech suffered a sudden but powerful blow, then the risks were great that the mech pilot would suffer as well. Even if the pilot's body remained hale and whole, the damage feedback would cause to react almost exactly as if she was suffering a real wound. The meshers did not fully understand the damage feedback phenomenon. At least, they didn't share their full understanding with VS. In the worst-case scenario, a mech that got hit in the head could potentially induce permanent brain damage to the pilot. The RA had done studies about probabilities and such and came with a number of thresholds. If the neural interface parameters fell below these figures, then the probability of neural interface accidents became infrequent enough to be tolerated by the association. For the meshers to let go of those strict standards and willingly permit the use of more dangerous neural interface represented a drastic shift in strategic direction. Why? VS couldn't help but ask. I think it is better to explain the need to maintain strict regulations in the first place. Jovi responded. For several centuries, we have tried to turn mechs into the main means of waging war among humans. To do so, we needed to make them as safe and reliable to operate as possible. In the early years, the mech industry was apprehensive about the acceptance of neural interface technology. They were afraid that mass adoption would not happen due to the very legitimate fears that potentates might have about making use of it. The early abuses certainly did not help matters. This is why the rules mostly became stricter over the years, so that you meshers could ensure the public maintained its trust in neural interface technology. VS remarked. Yes. However, for centuries have passed since the start of the age of mechs. Neural interface technology is no longer an unproven innovation. It has matured into a widely accepted tech that few people question these days. Mech pilots can remain confident that so long as they pilot a mech that is equipped with a certified neural interface model, they have no reasons to be afraid of the tech. This grants us a considerable amount of leeway. Realization dawned in V's mind. The scheme was quite simple now that he understood the greater score. You guys are taking advantage of all of the trust you have built up. By releasing more dangerous neural interfaces, many mech pilots will become attracted to the promise of raising their breakthrough chances. Their greed will surpass their prudence, and many of them will end up overestimating their capabilities. Few would question how many deaths this colossal policy would produce in the coming decades. Yet this game of statistics could produce very real consequences to mech pilots and the people around them. Families would break as casualties would mount. Once this phenomenon became known, people's trust in neural interface might drop. A century of progress in propagandizing the safety of neural interface technology could be unmade in a single day. You don't appear concerned, VS said as he scrutinized Jovi. That is because plans on how to manage this transition has always been in place. We are not entering this new situation blindly. There are many means we can employ to stimulate the potential of red humanity while mitigating the dangerous side effects. For example, transparency and choice will be at the forefront. The mech pilot must be given the option to choose to switch to a more dangerous neural interface. To be honest, the MTA has experimented with much milder initiatives like this in the past. This will be the first time we loosen the restrictions to such a great extent. VS could see how the proposal could work in theory. By giving mech pilots a choice, they could decide for themselves whether to stick to their old and reliable neural interfaces or take a chance and make use of the newly released alternatives. It would be even better if the neural interfaces become more modular, VS openly thought. That would make swapping a lot faster and easier to implement. The biggest problem is that the mech pilots may not be the ones to make this decision. Their superiors could order the mechs to switch to the new neural interface models without consulting the actual soldiers who will be doing all of the fighting. I am afraid that numerous mech pilots will be deprived the choice that I have given to St. Rosa Orphan and St. Isabel Coton. Jovi seriously nodded. He had deduced this potential downside as well. This is the trade-off that the Red Association has decided to make. We are balancing different interests. The need to promote more breakthroughs has become a much greater priority than before. In order to save red humanity in the short term as well as long term, we are prepared to accept the very real likelihood that many more mech pilots will suffer permanent brain damage or even death as a result of using new neural interface models that do not prioritize safety as much as before. This was the brutal calculus of war. The higher-ups had definitely made a lot of calculations. The results apparently promised rosy outlooks, or else they wouldn't have bent their principles to this degree. VS felt very mixed about this development. As a mech designer who presented similar options to his clients, he knew how tempting it was to select the more extreme option, not knowing how easily it could ruin people's lives. The temptation to advance was too strong among humans. Too many mech pilots struggled to break through and become strong enough to make a difference in the ongoing conflicts. They would feel tempted to make the dangerous choice. It would not take much for mech designers and others in their orbit to encourage them to make use of neural interfaces that they were frankly not qualified to use. If the mech pilots weren't skilled and disciplined enough, then the probability of suffering permanent injuries rose considerably. VS knew quite well how much this might damage the fundamental bond of trust between mech pilots and mech designers. Fortunately, the assumption that a crippling injury to the head would result in forced retirement may not be the case anymore. I bet that the availability of Carmine mechs must have persuaded many of the RACE leaders to approve of this initiative. VS made a guess. So long as the use of a dangerous neural interface does not outright kill the mech pilot, then the latter still has a chance to remain useful by controlling a mech with a Carmine system. With my innovation, the state of the brain has become nearly irrelevant. As long as the Carmine mech pilot is not comatose, he should always be able to control a mech through a blood pact. Jovi smiled in response. You are correct. Carmine mechs, as well as the emergence of novel new treatment methods based on cultivation science, has given us greater confidence that injured mech pilots can be treated. This will significantly diminish the fears and skepticism surrounding the policy initiative. These were not perfect solutions. Only one line of Carmine mechs came out so far. While other mech designers had worked hard to publish variants of the iconic Yellow Jacket series, they could only stray from the mech design so much until they broke the mech's capacity to form a blood pact. All of this meant that the mech market had become flooded with Yellow Jacket variants that appeared to be a mix between frugality and excellence. The variants served their own purposes. They had rapidly risen in popularity because VS failed to meet market demand. That would partially change once VS managed to release his elemental Carmine mech designs. The thought of it sent a trill of excitement through VS. Jovi had returned not just to serve as a messenger and a delivery boy, but also to facilitate the collaboration effort between VS and the Red Association. The development of polymetal mechs had been slow so far, but VS expected that to speed up very soon. I would love to make the Carmine system more universal and easier for other mech designs to adapt in their own mech designs. VS spoke. You will have to advance to the rank of Master Mech Designer first. I know. That will take a few years. But you can velocity it up if you help me complete my higher-end Carmine mech design projects. That is the plan, VS. Your Carmine mechs are of great strategic importance to the mech community. We will all benefit if you can flesh out your Carmine systems and make them more accessible to both producers and consumers. It would greatly help if you design Carmine mechs that target the middle segment of the first-class, second-class, and third-class mech markets. That was a relatively serious demand, but VS was willing to fulfill it. He had been thinking about it for a while. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7288. Game-changing elixir. VS knew that the policy changes regarding the safety limitations of neural interfaces could raise the frequency of breakthroughs. At the risk of suffering serious harm, mech pilots would find it much easier to stimulate themselves into exceeding their prior peak performance levels. He also knew that the star designers had secretly decided to change the Red Kingdom to loosen the breakthrough parameters. No longer were mech pilots restricted from triggering an apotheosis because their morality was too dark or because their minds weren't healthy enough. When VS took into account that the changes to a neural interface could work together with the changes made to the Red Kingdom, then the combined boost should result in a significantly higher breakthrough rate. It was difficult for VS to pin a solid number on it, but he wouldn't be surprised if pilot breakthroughs became 2 or 3 times more prevalent. Of course, the negative consequences of all of these changes were also considerable. Botched and tainted breakthroughs would definitely become more prevalent due to the Red Kingdom's higher tolerances. The average quality of expert pilots and ace pilots in the following years would also experience a noticeable drop. The meshers no longer cared if the champions of the next generation turned out to be angels or demons. Both were fine as long as they contributed to the war effort. VS thought about the implications of these actions. The meshers should know how dramatic these changes affected society. Desperate mech pilots would have a greater chance of attaining power, but they might not necessarily be the most stable of their kind. A lot of power would fall into the hands of future champions who would make the evolution which looked like an angel. Human infighting would exacerbate. VS did not see any way for all of these messy and egotistical champions to remain friendly with each other. While the ongoing wars would keep most of them honest for the time being, it only took a handful of bad apples to provoke conflicts that severely violated public order. The Red Association should have been able to predict these consequences, yet they persisted regardless of these concerns. This told VS that even if many of the association's leaders still wanted to maintain a certain degree of stability, they were willing to compromise their stance in order to make the mech community stronger. The weak and inadequate would perish in greater numbers, but their sacrifices would not be in vain because they could spawn many new expert pilots and ace pilots in the coming years. How much more of them would show up remained to be seen. VS already intended to track the relevant statistics carefully. Just as VS thought that this was the extent of the Red Association's scheme to crank up the emergence of high-ranking mech pilots, Jovi suddenly made another shocking revelation. Permitting the use of high-tolerance neural interfaces is one half of our new measures to increase the rate of breakthroughs. The other half consists of releasing a new line of products that can be a game-changer for many mech pilots, hindered by their own bottlenecks. The survivalist activated a projection that showed a vial filled with some sort of glowing liquid. VS did not possess a lot of expertise in elixirs, but he could instinctively feel that the contents of the vial had to be stuffed with energy. "What is this?" he puzzlingly asked. Jovi began to grin with pride. "This is an experimental elixir that the Red Association has developed in collaboration with the alchemy department of the Red Collective. We developed the new line of products under great secrecy. It still remains confidential to much of the public as we are not quite yet ready to debut the new elixirs. For now, we are still conducting trials with the latest set of formulas. We are already confident that we have optimized the new elixirs to the best possible extent given the relatively young and low-quality reagents available to us. If everything proceeds as planned, we will be making the new elixirs available for redemption on the War Exchange half a year later." The tone adopted by Jovi made it clear that the importance of this elixir line should be as great as the general pilot cultivation elixirs that VS was familiar with. The new products should have a different effect as their feel was a lot more potent. "What do they do?" VS straightforwardly asked. Jovi did not delay any longer. The T19, AEW26 series are classified as pilot breakthrough elixirs. They work by forcing mech pilots who ingest them into a forced breakthrough process. I cannot explain how this happens. I am not briefed on the mechanics and I doubt that you are authorized to know this information. You can just assume that as long as you ingest the correct variant of elixir, a mech pilot will experience an artificial apotheosis that may or may not end with an increase of piloting rank. That was a rather lawyer-like description. VS narrowed his eyes in suspicion. It sounds like these elixirs are far from perfect. What happens if the attempted breakthrough process fails? Jovi sighed. The pilot breakthrough elixirs can forcibly induce a state that produces a breakthrough, but it does not change the inherent qualifications of the pilot in question. If you feed this elixir to a veteran mech pilot with 40 to 60 years of solid experience under his belt, then he has a much greater chance of successfully becoming an expert candidate or demigod than a fresh-faced Mech Academy graduate. Skills, conviction, willpower, and other qualifications must all be well beyond the average in order for a pilot to successfully advance. A pilot breakthrough elixir sounded extremely impressive. Unfortunately, VS had overestimated its effects. The fact that it could not make up for the gaps in qualifications was a serious letdown. Maybe the only value of this new elixir was the fact that it could give mech pilots control over the timing of their apotheosis. No longer did they have to struggle for months or years just to encounter serendipity and trigger their breakthroughs. Still, that was already worth a huge amount of value. VS knew many mech pilots that had lingered at the edge of breakthroughs for many years. Their progress had stagnated for so long that they lost heart that they could ever trigger their apotheosis within their lifetimes. Once these pilot breakthrough elixirs became available, all of that would change. A huge amount of mech pilots would be eager to redeem them with the belief that as long as they could artificially induce a breakthrough process, they would succeed and become a lot stronger in the end. VS frowned in concern. He had a feeling that a lot of mech pilots might not be able to get what they wanted. Their tendency to overestimate themselves was too strong. What if they fell short of the standard necessary to becoming a demigod? What if they ultimately failed to cross the divide? What happens if they fail? Jovi couldn't help but wince this time. The consequences are not good. In the best-case scenarios, the mech pilots will end up with serious damage to their souls, their willpower, their physical fitness, and their lifespan. More serious consequences can amount to comas and outright death. Each pilot that ingests a pilot breakthrough elixir must literally gamble with his life. There is no way for a mech pilot to emerge healthy and undamaged after using it. This is also the reason why we are still restraining ourselves from making them available right away. The consequences of failure sounded harsh. In the past, pilot breakthroughs were extremely uncommon, but as long as a mech pilot managed to be lucky enough to undergo an apotheosis, the success rate was at least 99%. The probability of failure was so low that most people weren't even aware that this could happen. That would change drastically once these elixirs became available. They had the potential to massively increase the rate of breakthroughs, but the failure rate would be so high that the human cost would be great. Yet even then, the Red Association apparently thought that all of this suffering was worth the trade-off. Jovi proceeded to share more details about the new line of elixirs. What you should know is that the elixirs come in 6 different permutations. The first important variable is concentration level. The elixirs can come in a low concentration or high concentration version. The former is suitable to be ingested by standard mech pilots and expert candidates. The scientists have carefully calibrated the elixirs so that they are effective enough at the lowest possible concentration. Raising it will significantly increase the side effects, but will not necessarily yield better results. That made sense. I take it that the high concentration elixirs are for existing expert pilots? That is correct. The high concentration elixirs are made because the low concentration elixirs are too weak to have any noticeable effect. Peak expert pilots need a significantly stronger dose in order to induce a second apotheosis. Mind you that the difference in concentration levels are vast. The high concentration elixirs are much more expensive and are available in much lower quantities for these reasons. Their redemption prices are very high. I see. How else are you differentiating your products? The second way we distinguish between different elixirs is by producing elixirs that can be distinguished by the quality of reagents. The standard version is the cheapest possible variant. That affordability comes with a steep price. The failure rate is the highest and the side effects are the strongest. The premium version is a much more superior version. At the cost of utilizing higher quality reagents as well as additional rare ingredients, we have developed a mixture that is significantly more stable. The success rate is higher while the side effects are more controlled. That is interesting to hear. VS became intrigued. Is the standard version affordable to third-class mech pilots or second-class mech pilots? The former. The survivalist responded. We wanted to make them available to third-class mech pilots in order to give them hope. The usage of the standard version will doubtlessly lead to numerous failures, but third-class mech pilots happen to be the most abundant. The mech community is not short on this group. How cold? VS inwardly shook his head. He could already figure out the ruthless calculus of the Red Association. Third-class mechs were extremely weak. They consistently suffered disproportionate losses in the Red War, and they were not that useful against the mutated Vorabugs either. They could only barely hold their ground against the weakest and most marginal minor races of the Red Ocean. Perhaps the only value of third-class mech pilots was that they served as a large talent pool. Even if they lacked powerful augmentations, natural talents still emerged from their group. It was common for second-rate states to invite third-class expert candidates and expert pilots to join their militaries. An expert pilot could do a lot more good if he piloted a second-class mech as opposed to anything weaker. The same dynamic took place with second-class ace pilots. Although they were normally very loyal to their states or organizations, There were occasions where they agreed to be sold to a first-rate state. There were also cases where they grew so dissatisfied with their original lieges that they defected to the Red Association or a first-rate state on their own accord. However, that was still too far away for third-class mech pilots. The meaning of the standard version elixirs was very clear. The Red Association probably intended to give them away in such large quantities in order to dramatically produce more expert pilots from the lowest grade of mech pilots. So long as they were subsequently uplifted to second-class expert pilots, they could make a huge difference in the middle zones. That would subsequently ease the pressure on the upper zones, thereby allowing Red humanity to catch a break. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7289. Artificial Champions. V's mind was racing. The implications of the pilot breakthrough elixirs were massive. When Jovi told him that the alchemists deliberately created a formula that allowed them to mass-produce the standard version elixirs, VS knew that these products were solely meant to be sold to third-class mech pilots. The extreme price restrictions massively limited the quality and efficacy of the standard version elixirs. It was impossible to expect these cheap vials to produce good results on a consistent basis. Although Jovi did not share any specifics to VS, it was not that difficult to imagine the standard version elixirs to be vials filled with pure poison. The only reason why mech pilots wanted to ingest them anyway was that they occasionally produced accidental breakthroughs. As the space peasant equivalent of the mech community, third-class mech pilots could not afford anything better. Their contribution to the war effort also did not entitle them to receiving more expensive elixirs. Everything had to be fair. If third-class mech pilots could redeem superior elixirs at discounted prices, then where did that leave first-class mech pilots and second-class mech pilots? War was an extremely expensive business. VS had heard enough about the alchemy department to know that it had turned into a money-burning division of the Red Collective. The upfront costs of establishing R&D institutions, reagent cultivation farms, and production facilities were extremely high. Although the Red Collective had already gotten over the most difficult hurdles, the alchemy department would still run at a massive deficit for a number of years. The development of the pilot breakthrough elixir would help with increasing the department's revenue, but it was not enough to balance its books entirely. The alchemists needed to develop a lot more product lines in order to make up for the huge investments. VS actually expected for the alchemy department to take a few more years to come up with a product as strategically important as the pilot breakthrough elixirs. It appeared that the reports and rumors passed on by his chief of staff and the secret keepers were not quite accurate on this front. He would have remained fooled if he had not managed to promote to a Tier 2 galactic citizen so soon. As VS continued to think about the implications of what he learned, Jovi continued to expand upon the details of this new product line. According to our ongoing clinical trials, the T19 AEW26 pilot breakthrough elixirs yield imperfect results regardless of the outcome. Even when successful, the resulting mech pilots appear to be weaker and less in control of their newfound powers. According to many different testing methods, their willpower remains flawed and exhibits more loopholes than the willpower of mech pilots who experienced conventional breakthroughs. This is an expected outcome. Even if the differences in qualifications are small, the very fact that the latter group relied on pilot breakthrough elixirs is regarded as a source of weakness. This was not that difficult to understand. Natural breakthroughs were still considered the most honest and authentic way for champions to emerge among the masses. Pilots who relied on external means undeniably cheated the process. Even if they felt as if they deserved their breakthroughs, they could not lie to themselves. They had to confront the truth the hard way. If they failed to resolve this vulnerability, then they could forget about making further progress in their careers. Does this mean that mech pilots who have used an elixir once will experience slower progression? It is worse than that, VS. If the mentality of these mech pilots are not properly managed, then they can fall into a form of depression where they lose confidence in their own capabilities. Even if they can reach the peak of their current ranks, their bottlenecks become so strong that they are nearly unbreakable if they continue to rely on their flawed mindsets. The difficulty of resolving these flaws is much higher as these pilots will inherently lack the confidence of their more traditional peers. We anticipate that the use of a pilot breakthrough elixir may be the only way for them to trigger another apotheosis. However, the success rates will be much lower due to the greater flaws. In other words, mech pilots who made use of a pilot breakthrough elixir even once would have a miserable time. These artificial champions would always suffer from an inferiority complex due to the existence of natural champions. Expert pilots and ace pilots who earned their strength by relying on pure grit and conviction most definitely possessed better willpower than the new generation of champions who relied on elixirs to skip the game of chance. Yet it was precisely because breakthroughs were so rare and subjected to random chance that natural champions received greater tempering on average. They were much more prepared to endure the unfairness of the battlefield. VS could foresee a future where the mech community always looked down on artificial champions. This new class of high-ranking mech pilots would have to work multiple times harder in order to overcome the stigma of their unnatural breakthroughs. How numerous of these new elixirs will become available? VS asked. Will there be a point in the future where pilot breakthrough elixirs become as mid-grade as grass? Absolutely not. Jovi shook his head. According to what I know, the production of the cheapest low-concentration standard edition elixirs will still be relatively coveted goods, especially among third-class mech pilots. Territory has become extremely important in this regard. There are only a small quantity of planets that are suitable for the cultivation of specific reagents. Since humans only occupy a corner of the red ocean dwarf galaxy, there is a low ceiling on the output of most reagents. It is only through downgrading and diluting the pilot breakthrough elixirs to the greatest possible extent that we can reluctantly meet the demand of most third-class mech pilots. The alchemists worked hard to cut as many corners as possible. They continually compromised the success rate solely for the purpose of making the cheapest variant of the pilot breakthrough elixir as affordable and abundant as possible. VS mentally applauded this effort. He could only imagine how difficult it was for them to produce the lowest grade of elixirs. Even if the failure rate had skyrocketed, so long as it was able to produce at least a handful of successes, then that was enough to tempt many third-class mech pilots to gamble with their lives. If VS was in their place, he may have felt tempted to ingest this elixir himself. He had no doubt that the introduction of pilot breakthrough elixirs introduced a lot of convenience. Yet the new products also represented shortcuts that might not benefit certain mech pilots in the end. From Jovi's description, he developed the impression that the standard version of elixirs were reserved for space peasants. As for second-raters and first-raters who could make much greater contributions to the war effort, they may be able to afford the premium version elixirs if they fought hard enough. The survivalist liaison confirmed this impression. The premium version elixirs are much better in every regard. Your Larkin sons do not have to bother with the standard version elixirs. Supply will remain limited in the first 5 years or so, but the inflated prices will not be a problem for line fighters who have remained frugal and participated in enough defensive battles. Any second-class or third-class mech pilot who has actively fought in the Red War for at least 2 years and survived up to this point has likely received enough tempering to achieve at least a decent success rate when ingesting a pilot breakthrough elixir. I see. VS hummed. So there is another purpose to setting higher prices. If mech pilots can redeem the premium version elixirs too easily, they may be stupid enough to ingest them too soon. That will just lead to a lot of failed breakthroughs and avoidable deaths. Jovi nodded. Correct. Though the Red Association will not allow anyone to redeem the premium version elixirs. I am not afraid to admit that there are meshers who believe that we can revive our authority and strengthen our institution if we are in charge of controlling the elixirs. Even if we develop the pilot breakthrough elixirs in cooperation with the Red Collective, the Terrans, Rebarthans and Cybers will still have little choice but to cooperate with us if they want to gain access to higher quality elixirs. It sounded as if the Red Association already regarded the pilot breakthrough elixirs as a new trump card. If the meshers maintained effective control over the cultivation and production of the good stuff, then they could gain valuable leverage in a time where they had sustained continuous losses. This would definitely enable the RA to regain its prestige among mech pilots and maintain an indispensable role in society. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why the meshers were in a hurry to roll it out. VS already found it rather strange that the RA sought to rush the development process when the failure rate of all of iterations of the elixirs remained so high. If the meshers adhered to their original safety standards, then they would never release such a dangerous line of products. They would continue to iterate on the pilot breakthrough elixirs for a few decades or centuries until they finally created a mature set of formulas that promised at least a 90% success rate under the right conditions. The Red Association had obviously grown impatient. The Age of Dawn was a time of rapid change and miracles. Any organization that tried to remain slow and cautious would eventually get overtaken by its competitors. The Red Fleet had already initiated a lot of reforms. The Red Association, of course, couldn't fall behind. How much more troublesome is it to produce premium version elixirs? VS asked. Very troublesome, Jovi said with a frown. While I am not privy to the full details, I have learned that the formula not only requires greater quantities of lower-end reagents, but also requires small quantities of very rare higher-end reagents. These reagents mainly come from special exoplanets that can only be grown on specific terrestrial planets, ideally ones that have not been terraformed. That was an important detail. There are not that numerous untamed planets in human-occupied space. VS instantly realized the problem. Ever since humans began to colonize the Red Ocean, they started a terraforming frenzy. Many of the most mineral-rich planets have undergone rapid terraforming that forcibly changed the ecosystem in a hurry. I guess these kinds of environments are not conducive to the growth of sensitive exoplanets. Jovi nodded with a grimace. That is correct. We never realized the importance of maintaining a natural environment before the Great Severing. Now it is too late. There are only 2 ways for us to expand the production of high-end reagents. We can either go on the offensive and conquer more alien territories, or we can try to improve our terraforming technology. Neither of these solutions will yield quick results. so you can expect the production of premium version elixirs to remain limited for the time being. That was not good news for many mech pilots who wanted to get their hands on a better solution than the terrible standard version elixirs. VS thought for a moment. He found it relatively strange that the Red Association only prepared 2 versions of the elixirs. Why was the premium version elixir targeted to both second-class and first-class mech pilots? Why hadn't the Red Association developed an even better variant to cater to wealthier clients, including their own internal personnel? He suddenly widened his eyes in realization. Wait, has the Red Association developed a 3rd version of the pilot breakthrough elixir? Jovi looked surprised. What an astute guess. In fact, we did. The existence of the excellent version is meant to be an even greater secret. This is the absolute best version of the pilot breakthrough elixir. The failure rate is the lowest. The side effects are also reduced. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7290. The Price of Near Perfection. VS smirked. He knew it. The Red Association would never be satisfied with the premium version elixirs alone. Ever since VS learned that the RA intended to make this product available to external second-class and first-class mech pilots, he felt it was unlikely that the meshers would be fine with using the premium version elixirs alone. At the very least, their high-potential pilots that possessed excellent and promising qualities deserved better. The premium version elixirs apparently possessed a moderate failure rate, which meant that the RA stood to lose a lot of highly skilled and talented pilots. It may be fine for groups such as the Terrans and the Rebarthans to lose a lot of promising mech pilots. VS did not put it past the meshers to deliberately conspire to cull the high-level manpower pool of their rivals. However, that meant that it became important for the RA to master the production of a superior product. The so-called excellent version elixirs clearly served as the exclusive insider goods for the association. Their exclusivity was obviously a lot higher, and so was their production cost. VS could not imagine how much more difficult it was to produce a single vial of this top-end product. Jovi himself barely knew anything about this product. He could only offer vague descriptions. The production volume of excellent version elixirs is currently extremely limited, he said. Only a handful of our most skilled alchemists are permitted to synthesize them, and they do not have access to enough reagents to maintain a high degree of output. This is because the ultimate formula not only contains an even higher concentration of all of the ingredients used in the premium version elixirs, but also includes extremely rare supplementary ingredients. So the excellent version is a souped-up version of the premium version? What makes them different from each other? The addition of the latter allows the alchemists to suppress the negative side effects to a considerable extent. Jovi briefly explained. The failure rate is much lower. More importantly, an unsuccessful outcome will also inflict much less damage onto the pilot on average. This is one of the most important requirements for this elixir. In order to eliminate the negative consequences to the greatest possible extent, the alchemists drew upon wondrous materials that possess effects that are powerful and special enough to make a difference. While the ongoing clinical trials have not yet produced too many cases, I can tell you that each test subject who has ingested the excellent version elixir have uniformly broken through. Even if the same size could only be counted on a single hand, that was already a good result. VS enthusiastically leaned forward. What is the sample size? What is the quality of the test subjects? The sample size is too small to draw any definite conclusions. We will be able to provide you with much more rigorous statistics in a couple of years. As for the quality of the mech pilots, they vary considerably, but we have actually been careful in selecting them. No matter whether they were second-class or third-class mech pilots, they already have decades of experience under their belt. They are honorable soldiers and have reached the peak of their original ranks for at least several years. Their maturity levels may not be high, but they are still flexible and retain much of their potential. That caused VS to gather a clue from Jovi. Are you saying that the elixirs are more effective for more younger mech pilots? You are correct, VS. Although the pattern is not strong, we have noted that significantly older mech pilots tend to fail more often than normal. There are numerous possible explanations why this may be the case. One theory is that these mech pilots are so ossified and set in their ways that they are mentally incapable of withstanding the extreme changes brought by apotheosis. Their willpower may have also dulled and weakened with the passage of time. Many of them have already turned into parents and grandparents. Having offspring changes one's mentality. Soldiers are much less eager to risk their lives on the battlefield, though this is not always the case. Simply put, getting older made mech pilots less suitable for this path of willpower cultivation. The mech community already knew this to an extent. Most expert candidates and expert pilots tended to emerge fairly early in a pilot's career. If a pilot had made no progress in the first 50 years of his life, then it was much less likely for him to trigger any breakthroughs in his remaining years. Whether this was due to the importance of youth or the inevitable weakening brought by aging remained uncertain. The RA and RC had only just developed the pilot breakthrough elixirs. The alchemists and scientists struggled to understand what they were dealing with. The field of alchemy was still very new as it operated on conditions that hadn't been present on a large scale prior to the Age of Dawn. VS grimaced and crossed his arms. The existence of the excellent version elixir meant that the Red Association essentially possessed the means to guarantee a breakthrough for any pilot with good qualifications. However, Jovi's description made it clear that it was clearly a product that was made possible by piling up the most expensive reagents in a single vial. So long as any material possessed a positive effect and did not produce any negative interactions with other ingredients, then the alchemists tossed that into their cauldrons without conducting exhaustive studies. There was no time to study the properties of each individual reagent and meticulously record how they responded to different conditions. VS had the feeling that the alchemists had developed the pilot breakthrough elixirs by trying to restore tattered ancient recipes while also conducting a lot of random trial and error. This was a very haphazard and unsystematic approach to product development, but so long as the alchemists got lucky, it was possible for them to develop a viable product in a short amount of time. Red humanity couldn't afford to wait too long. The T19 AEW26 pilot breakthrough elixirs could only be regarded as first-generation products. Jovi already admitted that they were experimental products, which meant that it was clearly ethically problematic to make them available to the masses. At the very least, the standard version elixirs were so dangerous that even VS probably would not put them up for exchange. Third-class mech pilots may be the most numerous and least valuable soldiers out there, but they were still human. VS did not forget his third-class roots. Jovi's explanation clearly betrayed the Red Association's lack of respect towards third-raters. Couldn't be helped. The survivalists especially tended to reduce individual human beings into numbers. Just because they cared about Red humanity's survival did not mean they respected individual lives. It was for that reason that he felt that the motives behind releasing the standard version elixirs crossed a line. Too many mech pilots would get killed just so that the luckiest and most prepared among them would be able to trigger an early breakthrough. While these artificial champions could easily be promoted to second-raters and participate in more meaningful battles, they could only do so with the sacrifice of many of their colleagues. VS felt it would be much more fair if third-raters could gain access to the premium version elixirs, but so long as the supply of reagents and completed products remained limited, there was no good way to make this possible. Even if Red humanity managed to turn the tide and conquer large swathes of adversary territory, the exchange conditions of the higher-end elixirs might not necessarily improve. After all, once Red humanity acquired more territory, it became a lot easier to expand its population. More humans translated into more mech pilots. All of those individuals would definitely want to get their hands on the pilot breakthrough elixirs. Therefore, blindly increasing the supply of materials would not solve the problem. The best way to make pilot breakthrough elixirs more accessible to all was to tweak the formulas and make them more affordable. If the alchemical processes could be improved, then it might not take as many expensive materials to produce a single vial. VS believed that there was a lot of room for improvement for the first-generation products. The formulas for the standard version, premium version, and most notably the excellent version were so riddled with inefficiencies that they needed to undergo a long process of testing and optimization to make them cheaper. It was unrealistic to expect radical improvements to the formulas in the short term. The alchemists and scientists could have focused their efforts on iterating the elixirs over a longer period of time, but they chose to cut their research short in order to get the products ready for mass production. This meant that the mech pilots of the Larkinson clan would soon be able to redeem them from the war exchange. Due to their active participation in the Red War, many of them should be flush with war merits. They should easily be able to redeem a standard version elixir and may be able to get their hands on a premium version elixir if they happen to be frugal. However, VS feared that too numerous standard mech pilots ingesting the low concentration vials might end up ruining their futures. He also feared that the ace pilot candidates of the clan might not be able to resist the temptation to use high concentration vials. Rosa Orphan was not the only champion who felt frustrated by the lack of progress after becoming a peak expert pilot. At that point, the demigods most keenly felt how exceptional they needed to be in order to become saints. If VS had any say about it, he wanted his Larkinsons to eschew these dangerous elixirs and rely on natural breakthroughs, just as before. The problem was that the Larkinson clan risked falling behind the times if it maintained an overly restrictive stance towards pilot breakthrough elixirs. Even if the Larkinson clan as a whole rejected their usage, many other competing groups would be happy to put their own mech pilots at risk in order to birth a handful of new champions. Perhaps a future might come where artificial breakthroughs turned into the new standard. Natural breakthroughs would become increasingly less prevalent once more and more mech pilots ran out of patience. VS found this to be a rather bleak vision of the future. He became dissatisfied with the lack of high-grade options. If he was able to get his hands on a dozen or so high-end elixirs, then he should be able to meet the most essential needs of the Larkinson clan. What would it take for someone like me to redeem an excellent version elixir? He asked. I know you said that it won't be available to third parties, but my relationship with the Red Association is a lot better than most of them. I have already contributed much to the mech community, and I have no intentions of stopping anytime soon. VS feared the answer to his question, but he needed to know. His friend already anticipated this inquiry. Jovi paused for over a dozen seconds before he slowly revealed the answer. Given the extremely high value and scarcity of the excellent version elixirs, you can only redeem a single vial for a major favor from a Tier 1 galactic citizen. What? You heard that right. I am not exaggerating. Others in a similar position as yours will hear the exact same answer. The reason why the conditions are so stringent is because there is truly not enough of the excellent version elixirs to meet the insanely high demand. Perfection has a price. Or do you think the god pilots and star designers themselves have no need for them? They have their own disciples and clients. The orders placed by Tier 1 galactic citizens always come first. That is their undeniable privilege. Tier 2 galactic citizens can only obtain a vial of the most high-end version of the pilot breakthrough elixir if you directly trade it from their hands. Do you understand now, VS? More chapters in Buyer's Club 4. TMT. Chapter 7291. Super Combo Effect. It was times like these that VS regretted that he neglected the importance of alchemy and elixirs. He could not do anything about it due to his lack of background in these new and exciting fields. Due to the existence of Vulcan, VS happened to be extremely good at crafting artifacts. This was a pretty deep and profound discipline that required a lot of study, practice and dedication in order to achieve any major successes. Traditional blacksmithing and related fields happened to synergize well with mech design. It made sense to match his side profession with his main profession. Both of them were intrinsically related to the metal element. It was simple for VS to transfer skills in one profession to the other profession and vice versa. The same could not be said for alchemy. This was an entirely different field of expertise that had a much weaker relation to the metal element. From what he heard, the alchemy department primarily focused its recruitment on chi cultivators who happened to possess notable affinities for the other four elements, but most notably the wood element. The growth and cultivation of reagents, especially the more potent ones, demanded a lot of attention from specialized planters and farmers. Many of them had less than a year of training and cultivation under their belt. Their skills and extraordinary techniques were still rudimentary. Only the most talented and learned among them may have been able to skip ahead and master more potent techniques. This was probably the most important reason why the supply of premium and excellent version elixirs was not even close to meeting demand. Red Humanity needed more time to ramp up production and raise the quality of the end products. Until that happened, the good stuff would remain in short supply. Currently, VS did not think it was worth it to exchange a major favor for a single excellent version elixir. The effort and risk put into earning a major favor was worth much more than a single elixir, even one as good as the highest grade of pilot breakthrough elixirs. One important reason why VS looked down on this trade offer was the fact that VS could already induce breakthroughs by relying on his own methods. Sure, the risks and dangers were much greater, but at least he was able to exert better control over the process and outcome. Saint Tusa, Saint Dice and Saint Orphan all managed to attain their ranks as a direct result of his actions. Although his methods were far from perfect, VS was confident he could refine his approach and achieve good enough results to skip the usage of the elixirs. After all, the use of pilot breakthrough elixirs was a shortcut, not a challenge. Any pilot who broke through by relying on them inevitably suffered from sequelae. Even the excellent version elixirs could not avoid this consequence. In fact, the use of such a near-perfect product would probably cause mech pilots to feel even more unworthy due to the low failure rate. At least the mech pilots who successfully broke through with the help of the standard version could claim to have undergone a test of life and death. VS let out a deep breath as many different thoughts crossed his mind. He was not yet done with thinking over the implications. The pilot breakthrough elixirs possessed the potential to disrupt the entire mech community. How could he possibly maintain his composure in the face of such a colossal future development? This could have been a war-winning strategy. VS suddenly realized. If the native aliens happen to be our only enemies, then the drastic increase of expert pilots and ace pilots would allow us to more effectively fight back against the native alien warfleets. Their warships are vulnerable to expert mechs while their phase leaders struggle against our ace mechs. The more high-ranking mechs our side can deploy, the easier it will be to defeat the native aliens by relying on quality. Regrettably, quality is not an effective approach against the mutated Vorabugs. Jovi grimly nodded. His assessment matched that of VS. The mutated Vorabugs could leverage an unending tide of disposable insects. Not even god mechs could quickly clear a single star system of all hostile life. Therefore, a strategy that relied on expanding the pool of champions in Red Humanity would not work all that well. Defeating the mutated Vorabugs demanded an entirely different strategy. Still, that did not mean that the pilot breakthrough elixirs held no value. At the very least, multiplying the amount of expert mechs and ace mechs in the field would definitely ease the burden on much of the front lines. I have one big question for you. VS spoke as he thought about a big gap in Jovi's lecture about the elixirs. So far, you have mentioned the availability of a low concentration and a high concentration makeup for the pilot breakthrough elixirs. Are you guys developing an even stronger iteration that can be effective for God pilot candidates? This was indeed a very big question. Jovi already expected that VS would bring up this topic. Practically anyone who learned about pilot breakthrough elixirs couldn't help but consider this important possibility. Developing an elixir for peak ace pilots is impossible. The survivalist mech designer responded. First, the elixir's main function is almost certainly redundant. We know for a fact that peak ace pilots have gained enough control over themselves to start the mech-body merger process at will. Second, any other beneficial effects will be minimal unless the concentration of reagents is exaggeratingly high. You are talking about a much larger vial that is 1,000 times if not 1,000,000 times more expensive than a premium version elixir. Third, the failure rate will almost certainly be worse than a natural breakthrough because the very act of depending on an external aid that does not constitute a mech will be treated as a form of dependency by the pilot in question. VS sighed. I guess you are right. That was a pretty stupid question. Even if someone is willing to synthesize a super-duper version of the pilot breakthrough elixir, I do not think that any peak ace pilot is willing to serve as a guinea pig for such an outrageous experiment. Peak ace pilots possessed their own dignity. They had already become so powerful at their point that they were leaders and Tier 2 galactic citizens in their own right. It was impossible to hoodwink them at that point. In that sense, neither Jovi nor VS thought it was likely for the alchemists to develop an elixir that could truly make a difference for God pilot candidates. Perhaps that might change in the far future, but it would probably require an elixir or other form of aid that operated on different principles. After Jovi explained most of the general theory behind pilot breakthrough elixirs, he finally began to address why he disclosed this particular secret at this time. To be honest, VS, I did not have to share this particular secret development to you at this phase of its development cycle, he said. With at least 6 months of confidential testing to go, there was no need for you to be informed about its existence. Normally, we would have waited for at least 3 months before we could even consider the decision to give you a heads up. We could have presented you with much more reliable hard data at that point. The reason why we shared this information to you sooner is because we seek your assistance. That sounded unexpected. VS raised his eyebrow in bewilderment. I don't know about that. Alchemy falls beyond my field of expertise. As much as I would like to learn how it works, I shouldn't bite off more than I can chew. We are not seeking any further assistance from this angle. What we are asking from you instead is to help us expand our breakthrough system even further. Think about the measures that our association has taken. First, we lowered the standards of the Red Kingdom. Second, we are permitting the use of high-tolerance neural interfaces. Third, we are on track to release the aforementioned pilot breakthrough elixirs. Each of these factors can already raise the rate of breakthroughs by a significant extent. Combining them together will most certainly produce a combo that cannot be ignored. While we are already happy with the anticipated results, we believe we can do even better, especially for aspiring champions. It took a few more seconds for VS to connect the dots. He gasped in shock. Wait, are you thinking of borrowing the Transcendence Glow that I developed? Jovi grinned. Yes, we know for a fact that your Transcendence Glow has a positive effect on mech pilots who are attempting to break through. While its effectiveness on peak expert pilots and stronger is almost minimal, we believe it can still make a substantial difference for standard mech pilots and expert candidates. The glow can help them condense their convictions during their forced breakthrough moments. According to our scientists, the added inspiration and direction may be able to reduce the failure rate by as much as 20%. That was a massive difference and one that could yield numerous more expert pilots for Red humanity. A boost of this magnitude was already worth adding to the methodology that the meshers were eager to establish. However, VS grew a little more skeptical. As far as I know, the Transcendence Glow's effect on mech pilots has steadily been weakening due to the effects of E-energy radiation on Red humanity, he said. While it is still moderately effective for now, as people continue to passively or actively absorb E-energy radiation, their spiritualities will continue to grow more powerful and therefore more resistant against the glow phenomena. In order to make this work, mech pilots will need to be exposed to a high-powered form of this glow. What will it take for you to produce this effect, VS? VS briefly paused. I will have to design a dedicated mech that is centered around the aspect of transcendence from the ground up. It will have to be a pure support mech that is stuffed with hypermaterials. It will have to accompany mechs containing the promising mech pilots. Alternatively, you can commission the Creation Association to task its craftsmen to produce lots of totems of the aspect of transcendence. The hopefuls can purchase the statuettes or altars and put them in the cockpits of their machines. When the right time has come, they can attempt to beseech Lufa for a boost. Jovi did not expect to receive 2 different proposals. He frowned as he weighed both of them. I see. I shall relay your words back to the RA. I believe that the second suggestion is more expedient. The first requires you to design the specialized Transcendence mech in person. We cannot wait for you to complete this commission. It is better to approach the craftsman influenced by Vulcan and ask them to mold a batch of artifacts that are tied to what you have described as the aspect of transcendence. Please contact your subsidiary and tell it to cooperate with our initiative. I will. I am even willing to take a few days to handcraft a few totems if that is what it takes. Good. Very good. Jovi eagerly smiled. Because we intend to conduct an experiment. Theory is good, but it is only by combining it with empirical data that we can become more confident that our work is effective. What are you talking about? Jovi slipped his hand into his suit pocket and retrieved a small container. After unlocking the surprisingly elaborate security measures, he retrieved a vial containing a special kind of power. Is that? This is the T19 AEW 26 LP Pilot Breakthrough Elixir. In this case, it is the low concentration and premium version of the new product. What do you think about using it in the next battle against the Goliath Hive? More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.